Hello, and welcome everybody to a Nightlight special. These are shows that are favorites of mine because I get to speak with amazing authors, incredible people who have lived the fantasies we all dreamed of, and Gloria Amendola is both of those things. She is an author and an intuitive with a passion for esoteric knowledge and dream language. She likes to find the truth of things hidden beneath the surface. Gloria travels internationally and speaks to audiences about the Holy Grail mysteries and their connection to the secret destiny of America. She helps people understand history from an alternative perspective, putting the pieces together so that people can explore new possibilities and practices on their spiritual pathways. She has written original scripts for theater that have been produced nationally. Her travels have brought her to sacred sites worldwide to experience these powerful landscape temples firsthand, and they have changed her from the inside out. She follows in the footsteps of the enigmatic Knights Templar, walking where they walked, gathering impressions from the traces they left behind. Gloria has learned that where they walked, so too the ancients walked. Initiates of the mysteries have gathered in these sacred sites worldwide for many reasons we are just beginning to understand. They left us an extraordinary legacy, one that could be decoded when we were ready to comprehend its true nature. And thankfully, that time has come. She has written at least 4 books, and some of them are on the scroll. I really encourage you all to check them out, to read them. They fascinated me enough to read all 4 of them, and I found them interesting, informative, and as with most authors in this genre, they make you think and they make you question, and that's really the main point of all of this, to question and to look inside yourself and find for things that resonate and things that don't resonate. It gets you on with your own search on your own pathway, and it's a very exciting time. And I am so delighted that Gloria is able to spend some time with us this evening. Welcome to Nightlight, Gloria.
Oh, thank you, Barbara. It is really, I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, it's very rare that you find someone else that talks the same language. And
when we spoke before and you told me you were interested in the Reneslechateau mystery in France, I got so excited because it really is, it's not every day I find someone who is really intrigued by this mystery. And I think that's just because people probably don't know about it because it's an incredible mystery.
Well, it goes beyond. I think that's what I find so fascinating with your work. I mean, yes, Knights Templar are fascinating, but yes, it goes back beyond that, and ley lines and power centers, and it's so fascinating that you see layers of history on top of one another in the same spot. I'm sure there are spots here in the United States like that. I haven't found them yet, but I'm thinking that possibly some of the serpent mounds in the Ohio Valley may have that same kind of feeling. But just from reading the books, now I could feel the energy. Now, Holy Blood, Holy Grail is the very first book that I ever read that was, put in that particular time frame in that particular spot, and of course I was so intrigued that I didn't sleep for 2 nights while I read the whole book. So,
oh, that's funny. Yeah, Henry. I just spent time with Henry Lincoln in France. He's a friend of mine, and very interesting as we walked the landscape and talked and discussed things and went over things. And he's actually at the wonderful age of 83, 84. He's now actually considering even further possibilities of some of the things that he has discovered in the countryside there. So that's pretty exciting.
Oh, absolutely. And, just out of curiosity, what was there before Reneslechateau was there? Well,
Reneslechateau has been there for a very long time. It went by a few different names, but Rede, Rhedae, was a more ancient name. But even when you trace back to that location, it's as if people always knew there was something special in the land there. Mm-hmm. You can go pretty far back with what I would call bloodline connections in the story of Dagobert, in the Merovingians, and perhaps the child Sigebert being brought to Reneslechateau for safekeeping, if you will. And that goes back a very, very long time. But it goes back much further than that because there is a very strong Roman history there. So that goes back a couple thousand years. Yeah. And it goes back even further than that.
Yeah, there are places on this planet that just seem to have a memory of and I call it magic, and other people will call it a spiritual energy void or whatever. I call it magic. But they have a magic about them that you just know that something is seeping out of the ground there that is healing, that is special, that is magical, that allows for greater insight and wisdom to be gathered from our unconsciousnesses, and it's an awakening place, it feels like, as well.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. And, before the Romans, the Celtic people were there. And so we have the Druids that come along with that particular culture and that particular group. And even to this day, in the year 2014, there are still, a handful of standing stones in the area. And they were part of that Druidic culture. And you can climb from Reneslechateau, which is down the hill. Well, it's about a 10-minute drive from Reneslechateau, and it's a place of the waters. There is a connection there to Notre Dame, to Charlemagne. And if you go up to the top tier of Reneslechateau in that village, you'll see a standing stone. And when you get there, that whole area is part of the geometry, part of what Henry Lincoln figured out. And there's a standing stone aligned directly to Reneslechateau. So, again, as you traverse the landscape in the general Rennes area, Reneslechateau area, you will find a handful of them. And they're always marked in a very interesting way. So I wish I could say more about that culture, but, given the fact it's probably at least 2,500 years old, there's not that much left on the ground in that regard. Right. But it was there, and there is an imprint.
That's fascinating. And it just, to me, when reading Holy Blood, Holy Grail, of course, that's maybe for those who have not had the honor of having read it. Can you kind of synopsisize it just a little bit, the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, just to give people an idea of what we're talking about?
Well, I will say this, because there are so many layers of history there. Right. If we go in through the more modern time of Father Saunière and Abbé Boudet and Abbé Gély, the three local priests, as you begin to read the books, you'll find that a hidden hand was working behind the scenes looking for something. And Father Saunière became the priest in the village of Reneslechateau. And whatever he found in the church and where it led him in the local landscape, whatever that mystery is, it keeps peeling back layers in terms of the Jesus story and the story of Mary Magdalene and the story of a bloodline and the story of heresy. The story of a story that goes way beyond religion to a deeper truth. And to this day, there are many of us, we're all still trying to put it together in all its many facets. But it is an incredible story of intrigue and suspense, and who has lived and who has died in the preservation of these volatile secrets, certainly at that time. at the time of Father Saunier, and it's just extraordinary.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. To me, it opened me up to just so many. I think Holy Blood, Holy Grail, in that particular, that was the very first book that I ever read that came into the theory that Jesus has, survived the cross, or that Mary Magdalene carried the child, Jesus's child, and you kind of you step back and you say, whoa, wait a minute, and then you start seeing all of the hints that you've always seen through history, and yet you didn't pick up on them until this pulled them together, and it was amazing. It was and then of course you have the Da Vinci Code as well that came in much later, but the grounds, the mystery, the church, the chapel. Was it a chapel or a church that he built?
It's called the Church of Mary Magdalene. And he didn't build it. It was there. Actually, if we start with that, with the village, the church was consecrated to Mary Magdalene in Reneslechateau, in about 1050, give or take. I mean, it's old.
But
it's very, very old. So when Abbe Saunier, Bérenger Saunier, arrived at his post in the village to take on his assignment there, he inherited a very dilapidated church. It was a very poor village. It was in the middle of nowhere. And he grew up down the hill in Montezels, and he and his brother were priests. They would have known about the stories of treasure. By the time they were growing up, they would have known very well about the stories of the local mysteries, the mysteries of the Knight Templar, the stories of treasure. I have to think that he always knew that from day one. But the church had already been there for a very, very long time.
Okay, but he did renovation on it, did he not? Because I know that there are some very unusual statues and stuff that he had put there at some point.
My God, absolutely he did renovation. He renovated, he actually did quite a lot. Now you have to understand, this is a very poor village. On top, it's very small. I mean, even to this day, I think there's about 100 people that live in Reneslechateau and maybe 25 on the top of the hill. Mm-hmm. It's a very small number of people. And the church, all of a sudden, he began to get very private with his maneuvers around the church and in the cemetery, and he was angering villagers because he was digging things up in the cemetery of the church, and he began to decorate it with garish colors, and it was macabre at times. It was bizarre. There are stations of the cross in the church that were supplied by a company in which the owner was a Freemason. And yet I've seen them in other churches, and they're painted differently. But these were painted in that church, no less, with attention to detail, certain use of silver paint, and little detail that it said that Saunier himself painted in. It's as if he was coding. He is to this day has left a secret code in that church, and some very, very smart people have tried to decipher what exactly was he telling us.
It has the same feeling to the Sinclair Chapel, just sort of
up in
like
Rosslyn.
Yeah.
I've been to Rosslyn. I was actually knighted in Rosslyn in my Templar order in 2007. And to me, the difference between Rosslyn and Reneslechateau, the Church of Mary Magdalene, Rosslyn is like an esoteric library in stone. It holds. It holds foliage and certain plants from the New World, but there are many traditions represented there. There are many esoteric workings in stone. They're the famous pillars. So when I've been in Rosslyn, it's like a general statement on esoteric knowledge, on the evolution of esoteric knowledge, the underground stream. But when you're in the Church of Mary Magdalene in Reneslechateau, it's very specific to the mystery there.
Okay.
You know, that's what sets it apart. Like you were talking about how he put a demon in the church. And as you walk into it, as you walk in the door, to the left, crouching, is a hideous-looking demon. Some people call him Asmodeus. Some people say he's a representation of Pan. Some people say it's Rex Mundi. You know, a variety of names. And on his shoulder is a holy water stoup. And then if you look above it, there's a B and an S, which you might say, okay, that's Bellinger Saunier. That's the name of the priest. But if you know the landscape, you know the Blanc and the Sauls River come together in Rennes-les-Bains, which is down the road a bit, and that in itself is a mystery. So is it Bellinger Saunier? Is it the Blanc and the Sauls? We don't know. And then right above that, there's these two salamanders. And you're thinking, okay, what's that about? And then above it are four angels, each one making a motion to the sign of the cross. So really, if you walk in and you look at that, I think immediately people are just completely put off by that. They just don't know what to think of it. I'll give you one interpretation that I think the priest may have been using there. Pan, I think, represents earth, even though we do know that the demon in the Temple of Solomon was restrained by water. So there's always a double and a triple message in Reneslechateau, in the mystery. But I'll go with this one for the moment. So you see that Pan figure representing earth energy, earth force, right? That creature called Pan. And then above is the element of water, right? The holy water stoup, the clamshell, if you will, that fills with water. And then above it, the salamanders represent fire. And the angels above that represent air. So on one hand, you could say he chooses fire, water, earth, and air as alchemical elements as soon as the person walks into the church. Right away you know there's something to do with alchemy that's being told in this place.
You know, when I know that he put phenomenal thought into the message that he was going to leave for those who came after him. And my feeling, and it's only my own personal feeling, so but my feeling was that he was trying to construct a message so that until the level of consciousness had been reached for people to understand what he wanted to share, nobody would be able to solve the problem.
Well, quite frankly, nobody has been able to solve it, so you're probably right on. I mean, I know very, very bright people who've been studying this mystery, for up to 30, 35 years, and they have not yet figured it out. They may have a piece, they may have two or three, but the cohesive story, nobody. And there are many of us who are deeply interested in this mystery. So it's just amazing that, who could create something that would be so hard to figure out?
To decipher after this long. Well, and, I know that the Vatican had been in contact with him. I know that the Vatican knew of what he was doing. They knew of his renovations and stuff, and there were even Vatican people that came and visited him. And he was actually left alone. They didn't try to fire him or anything like that. Of course, I guess you can't fire a priest, but he was allowed to continue to do what he did, and So there must have been something really profound going on there, and that's what always has drawn me back to the mystery. There was something so profound, and yet he was a simple priest. And with the Catholic Church especially, they like to sort of, if something is of a very profound nature, they like to pass it up the ranks, so to speak. And this was left alone. This wasn't touched by the Vatican. They stepped back and they allowed him to do what he was going to do. So it does make you wonder just what he could have possibly found and what was his intent? I mean, he was ill for a very long time, and then he died, and then his housekeeper passed away as well. And you said that she had burned a lot of papers before she died. What could they be hiding? Do you have any idea?
Well,
at all?
I will tell you this. And I actually just found out when I was with Henry, that's Henry Lincoln, just last week, because I just got back from France. We talked a lot about Bellinger. I had certain questions about Marie because she's always, to me, we don't know her full story. The alleged housekeeper, they were deeply in love. That's no surprise. And at that time, it was fairly, it was not uncommon for a priest to have a girlfriend, if you will. I mean, it just wasn't. And there's no doubt that he really loved Marie. Bellinger died in 1917. Marie d'Arnaud did not die until 1953. And that fascinates me more so than Bellinger, because I'll go back to that piece in a minute. If you think 1917, and then she didn't die until 1953, she was the one who owned all the property. She was the one who knew what he was up to. And she was allowed to remain in Reneslechateau for all those years, and they knew she knew the secrets.
Wow. And yet, it just doesn't, don't you wonder why she didn't share something with someone?
I do. I've been thinking a lot about it as I was preparing to go this time, and that's what I was talking to Henry about. I said, Henry, why do you think she was allowed to carry on for so long? And the powers that be that understood that there was a great secret, there was something going on. Why didn't they try to go after her at some point, as others in this story have experienced?
Now, there was another priest that was killed, wasn't there?
Yes, actually, his name, he was Abbé Gély of Custassa, very tiny little place. You drive up the hill, you drive down, you barely see a few houses and so forth. A friend of mine who lives in the area, he's a retired Scotland Yard detective, Colin Taylor. He did a cold case file review on the Gély murder and presented it to a group that when we were there in 2012, and he had some very interesting facts about that murder. But the long and short of it was Gély was about to retire. He was very paranoid. At that point, I think all the priests were paranoid, and he wouldn't let anyone in if he didn't recognize them. Nothing was really taken from the house. He was bludgeoned. It was a messy crime scene, and whoever killed him left cigarettes in some of his blood, and he hated cigarettes. So whoever it was really leaving a message. And that's just Abbé Gély. He was probably one of the more minor, of the three. He was probably the least important, I'm saying. But yet, look at the fate that befell him. And it was said that he was visited by two men. So Henry, when I was talking to Henry last week, we were going over these details. And I said, well, you're talking about these two men visiting all the three priests. And we don't know who the two men are, but and I just want to insert this because it just dropped in. And you've read all my books, Barbara. Remember the two men in both novels? they especially come when Marta, the main character, is in France and they show up again, those two men.
Right. Kind of like Men in Black.
I had no idea what Henry, when Henry was telling me this last week when we were talking over and over about this, I had no idea when I wrote those books. So those novels have real intuitive inserts in them that come dropping in ways that I later find out are true, and yet I'm just creating and I'm just allowing. So anyway, that was just something I thought I would share. So Henry said, well, the two men visited Abbé Boudet, and he was the brains behind the operation, in my opinion. He was the priest of Reneslechateau and the neighboring sister village, if you will. And so I said, well, wait a minute. You're saying that these two guys visited Boudet. Boudet had cancer. He says, yes, he did, but he died much sooner than anyone thought he would. And it is said that these two men, these men in black, whoever they were, visited him as well.
Wow. Well,
and then he died. And apparently these men also visited Bérenger Saunière as well. And yet nobody visits Marie. So to get back to your question about when I was telling you about her burning documents, the only way I know that is because a friend of mine had made contact with an elderly woman who lived in the general area, and she would go sit with Marie maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, and they would talk. And later on in the years, she would help Marie burn papers. And so my friend asked, well, what were these papers you were burning? And she said they were papers adverse to the church.
Huh. Well, originally I think she was swayed by Bellinger. You do begin to wonder. The story goes, for those of you that haven't read the story, is that he was a priest in this very poor area, and that one day while he was digging somewhere on the property, he found manuscripts, papers, old papers, and theoretically it traced the bloodline from Jesus and Mary Magdalene, forward in time, and that he was in possession of these papers, and you never really, in the book, you never really got the feeling he was blackmailing the Vatican. Yet that's also a feeling that I got, and that's how he was able to keep the church going and do the renovations and all of that stuff. But my gut tells me there was more to it. Yeah.
And it is a very complex story. There are those who say that Bérenger, when he found what he did with the papers that you speak of, he really didn't quite know what to make of them. It was almost as if they were written in a language he didn't understand, or had perhaps a code in a cipher. And he makes a trip to Saint-Sulpice in Paris, which is always a part of the esoteric mysteries and part of this story. There are other people who will tell you, no, he was never there, or there was no evidence. Now, just because there isn't any evidence doesn't mean he wasn't there. Right. And we do have Saunière traipsing all over the place, Narbonne and Lyon and all these unusual, perhaps Girona. I'm not even sure exactly what he was doing. He was all over the landscape. He was a busy man, and he seemed to be frequenting a lot of, I'll just say, for lack of a better word, secret societies or societies that hold secrets. And he had the most curious visitors visiting him, the intonation of the Habsburgs and what they were looking for. And the more you read on the story, the more you get confused, because, you'll read one set of facts, and then the next thing you read, it will say, no, those facts aren't true. So it's very, very difficult to know exactly the true details of Saunier's life and where he was moving about and what he was really hiding. Now, when you talk about the papers, Barbara, my intuitive memory, a memory that I hold before I knew much about this mystery, was that there were genealogies. Like, he clearly found genealogies. Yeah. And I believe that those genealogies, a copy of them at least, is still somewhere to be found.
I would think so, because it doesn't make sense that they're, come on, priests keep copies of everything. They used to copy Bibles. So, I would think that something as precious as that had to be copied and put in other places as well. But it feels to me as though there's something beyond it. We have treasure hunters that are looking for the Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant and all sorts of big the Temple of Solomon's treasure and all of that. And yet my feeling is that the kind of treasure that he was protecting was not of a physical kind, but it was more of a. It absolutely would shake the church up, which is appropriate. I mean, certainly.
Exactly. And, the more history you read, the more it is difficult to keep everything straight, because when the Romans sacked the temple in Jerusalem and took what was available to them, in other words, what the Jews in the Holy Land may not have secreted away. And we know that they did pull things from the temple or bury them deep into the ground, because that's what the Templars were about in the Crusades, going forward in time. So there is that level. But when the Romans bring their treasure back to Rome, the Visigoths later on sack Rome, and then they take the treasure. And you can follow that Alaric I. You can follow his travels, and there's a couple of places that the treasure does go missing, and one of them. I forget where it is, but it's a ways away from Reneslechateau. But then there's another story that brings it almost to there. So, in other words, there was a trail of physical treasure, but it's my sense that the Templars got to all that. They figured that out, because the stuff they got in Jerusalem under the Temple Mount, I think they kind of knew where that stuff was. But so again, I do think that there is a physical treasure, but I do believe that the more explosive part of the story is not only that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married with a family, but that Jesus did not die on the cross.
Right. No, I've never thought that he did. And it's always been a wonder to me. Of course, he had to die in order for there to be Christianity. So, you suddenly discover that he survived the cross and he was married and had children, and you really take away the foundation of a whole bunch of churches here. So,
well, you take away the foundation of a false religion that is steeped on Pauline Christianity, or Christianity based on St. Paul. But when you look at the deeper meaning and the traditions that Jesus and Mary Magdalene would have understood, and the teachings that would have come through the various aspects of the Essene community, and you have the Nag Hammadi text and the Dead Sea Scrolls to support that now, you would understand that Jesus and Mary as master initiates, as teachers, as druids, if you will. There's an old saying, Jesus is my druid. There's a reason why they say that. But having said that, you would understand that their beliefs were a more mature, ancient understanding of the steps of initiations a person needs to go through on their journey to enlightenment and self-mastery. And to me, that's far more real and more empowering for the individual than the horrendous Pauline version of Christianity that took over the world that institutes certain concepts of a dying and resurrecting God that, first of all, were already present in the ancient world with Mithras and Osiris, and you know, it was just an archetype that the people understood.
Well, you know, and he did study for quite a while in Egypt. So he had, you know, those, and of course there you have Horus, and you know, dying and being resurrected and everything. So I would say that it almost feels like now the story's out there, and I'm not sure exactly where I first heard of it, but there is the Book of Love, theoretically written by Jesus about his teachings, has never been discovered, and yet it's out there. So
no, it hasn't. And if you read, there's a wonderful little book called I think it's called The Secret of Montségur, and it's based on archival documents in the French archive of a young girl and her mom, and I don't even know what the gentleman's position would be. It's been a while since I've read the book, but the long and short of it, the reason why I bring it up is because it takes place more in the Cathar country. Well, there are Cathar castles all in that region, but it's a little further away from Rennes. And it basically talks about that Book of Love and how Columba, who's the little girl, it kind of goes missing through her because it wasn't time. And people are always, and there's a prophecy about when it will be found again. And I just finished reading a book that I had read years ago called Jesus After the Crucifixion by Graham Simmons, who was a lifelong traveler in this mystery and a Reneslechateau resident. And he believed in the Book of Love deeply himself, and he believed that it would be found too, but to date it has not.
Well, there is a Gospel according to Mary that has been found. So
yes.
so that you know, some of the material is out there, but you know, it just, to me, it seems like the message that was being preached so long ago is no longer a part of the teaching of the church named after him, which you know is a little upsetting and unsettling.
Well, it's very upsetting because they're not teaching the teachings per se. They keep reenacting his false story, and they keep people dumbed down by this perpetual cycle of the dying and resurrecting sun god. That's what the story, and I'm not trying to insult anyone. I grew up Catholic, believe me. I had to wade through all of this myself and figure it out and deal with my emotional response to figuring out where the evidence took me. But the dying and resurrecting solar god is the story that just keeps getting played out every year. And so, you know what I mean? There's no growth there. You're stuck in the parameters of a story that's not even true, and it's one that renders, no matter what anyone says, it renders Jesus powerless. It renders him a victim. And the fact that he died for our sins, if you think about that, it's ludicrous.
Yeah. I mean, there were sins that hadn't even been invented yet. Stop and think. But you know, it always blows my mind because the story is a beautiful one, but I was talking to Rob Sullivan, who has written a number of books, and one of them is the Ark of Enoch, and the other one is Symbols in the Cinema, and he really talks about how we are pre-programmed to recognize archetypes, and you know, apparently we're pre-programmed before birth, so that the sun god being born and dying and being resurrected is something that we absolutely, you know, it's imprinted in us that this is what happens, you know, and so when we see stories or hear stories or see movies or read books in which this is acted out again and again, they become bestsellers because it feels familiar to us. And I would rather think that he lived a long and happy life and had great-grandchildren, because that, to me, would be the happy ending that he certainly deserved. But now I know that basically the story of Reneslechateau is about Mary, and did she, according to the theories that I've read, she either did or did not die in that area and is or is not buried there.
That sounds about right. If you look at her legends that can be verified, and you go to the Marseille area of France, more towards the Nice, Nice and the French Riviera. Okay, so you're in that part. The legends have her come ashore with a group of people to Sommery de la Mer, which is near there. And so when you visit St. Baume and St. Maximin, you see these beautiful and wonderful pilgrimages to the Magdalene. You see the Basilica, and they tell you, this is where, and it's in my books too, this is where her remains were later found. And it's interesting because, French royalty and people of position and power are always looking for the relics of the Magdalene. Always. And I have this in my presentations when I speak. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be doing one in Tuesday in New Preston that has a lot of this material in it. There were kings who claimed descendancy from the Magdalene. French kings. So the monarchy was in reverence of her, and there are extraordinary places in France which are dedicated to her. La Madeleine in Paris, Vézelay, and the people that would go, Richard the Lionheart and Bernard of Clairvaux, and kings and queens. So anyway, not to get off the track, but so you can follow real legends in Provence, in Marseille, Sommery de la Mer, St. Maximin, St. Baume. But when you go, it's the craziest thing. When you go to Reneslechateau, if you are connected into the Magdalene, you will go there, and you will experience her, and you will feel her presence. And yet the legends of her being there are so veiled that you really have to talk to the locals and see what stories they might offer you, if they will offer any. And it is the most peculiar thing, and yet there are so many of us that do her work in that area.
It seems fascinating in that, yes, Reneslechateau was made famous by Holy Grail. I think before that, it was kind of there. And
yeah, you're right.
When you look around the landscape, and when you see the clues, the one painting that has the tomb that once was there on a hillside, but I understand has now been destroyed because the owner of the property was sick and tired of having people traipsing and digging up his property.
Absolutely, that's true. And that family that owned that was a Connecticut family?
No, shoot, really?
Yeah.
I can't. I can believe it, but I can't believe it. You almost know that there's still something there that hasn't been found.
As a matter of fact, when I was with Henry, in my group, we find it's a hard place to find the park because it's very winding, weaving roads, and the people drive very fast, the local people. So it's hard to find a good little turnoff so you can park the car. But we finally did, and we walked down to the bridge, the area where you can look right over, and took pictures again. And, Henry was talking about some things that really only Henry remembers at this point because of his age and, having been there for so long, so many trips, he lives there now. And we were going over all of that. And even with the tomb being gone, there is still such a mystery there. There is still such a pull. And the idea of Poussin painting the shepherds of Arcadia and that tomb and the backdrop, it's just extraordinary. It's extraordinary that even he was involved in the mystery. And one of the people that he was connected to, another mysterious, way behind-the-scenes person involved in this whole enigma, if you will, is Athanasius Kircher. And he was part of a teacher of Poussin. So, I mean, we can go to so many different timelines and see the secret keep being handed down. Yeah. Now, I'll throw out another one just for the heck of it for you and for your listeners about the complex mystery of Reneslechateau. You know how, and actually it's very popular now. It's really in the mindset of people. You know how they made the movies on Narnia recently?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay, so that's been done more recently. Well, it is said that C.S. Lewis, the creator of the Narnia stories, knew about the Reneslechateau mystery. And I think the first one is called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah.
I believe that's the subtitle.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people believe that he was actually referring to Reneslechateau. And in the Church of Mary Magdalene, there is a hidden room that you don't see. And it's sometimes considered where the priest would keep the vestments, the wardrobe. And it's just an interesting part of the church because you don't really see it. And it is believed, you know how the kids would go through the wardrobe to get to Narnia? I think in the first one anyway. Do you remember that part?
Yes, I do.
Well, anyway, to make a long story short, the people believe that C.S. Lewis knew about the mystery there, and that when it was subtitled The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it was really about going through that portal into another world. And it's believed that C.S. Lewis understood that aspect of Rennes, and that's what he was creating in the stories.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that would make sense. And if there were going to be a portal or a threshold to another dimension, that's an area that would be very logical to put it in, because it's not you don't do it in the middle of Paris or the middle of England or New York City. You put it someplace that's out of the way, but has history and has vortexes and has the ley lines that would power something like that. There are so many aspects to that area that have, my term magic, going on there, energy being felt, and it just, to me, seems as though there's something else that is going to burble to the surface. It just doesn't feel like the story is done by any means, and that there has to be...
No, it's
not. And most probably... the next chapter is probably beyond my imagination or yours or anybody else's. It's hard to know where this story could possibly go. But because of late there is so much in the news, there's so much going on in all sorts of, in the media especially, about, the Freemasons and their treasure that left, in the 1200s, and it came to the United States, and it was buried here. And, where did they bury it? And people are hunting for treasure all over the place.
Where have you seen that recently? I'm just curious.
That's been on, let's see, I've seen that on America Unearthed, Scott Wolter.
Yeah, Scott's a buddy of mine.
Yeah, he's done a couple of those. Because he sees the Freemasons everywhere. I mean, he's hot for Freemasons, that's for sure. And then you look at Oak Island, the dig they have there. That's another. Oh my God, what's there? Is it Shakespeare's papers that are saved in Mercury? Is it the Ark of the Covenant? Is it the candelabra from the temple when it was ransacked? And it's so much is coming out that information has been held back from us in many ways and in many places, and I just get the feeling that at some point in time there's going to be an explosion of information that the church cannot deny or disclaim, and that there's going to be a major shift in the world.
Well, it's so interesting you say that, because I know Scott. I spent time with him in France. As a matter of fact, I just saw him up in Rhode Island when he flew in to defend the Narragansett Bay rune stone, because North Kingstown, Rhode Island, has now accepted guardianship of this runic stone, and they don't know what the message is on it. So it was this whole thing about getting them to preserve it, and they understood what they had, because it had been stolen. Very long story there, very interesting.
Yeah.
And I was shocked that Scott decided to tell them the whole story. I thought he was just going to kind of come in on the Templar Viking level and just leave it at that. But nope, he went to ancient Egypt. He went to the bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and I thought, oh my God, these people are going to freak out. Every single one of them on that town council was glued to their seat for 2+ hours. I was up there as well, and so I just had to say that, because you talk about the shift, and there's so many of us who have been working with this knowledge, and I absolutely agree that there is a groundswell of interest and research, and there's stuff, there's some stuff that I can't even talk about that is coming out soon enough, and it is definitely supports all of this. And I've often said to a few of my friends that the real shift happens when this story can no longer be held back, because that will tell me the vibration in the world is such that their lies can no longer be supported, whether it's cosmological and whether people are just waking up to it because of the internet. In the end, it doesn't matter. When the shift happens, and it's close, and I believe it's close at hand, it's going to bring a groundswell of liberation for people. Once they get past perhaps the shock at this point, I don't even know how much of it is a shock anymore, but seeing more of the evidence and they get past it, they're going to find that they're liberated from it. And that is really when a huge aspect of the shift happens, in my opinion.
Well, I think that there's a sense of outrage, too, because...
and there should be.
Well, absolutely. I know a long time ago in the 50s there was some sort of investigation done by the government that the American public wasn't educated enough to be able to understand UFOs. Therefore, everything would be hidden from us. I mean, and then of course we've had Roswell, and we've had the Phoenix Lights, and we've had all of these. I mean, it's common knowledge, for God's sakes. Give us the information you've got. And then there was the incident with the Kincaid's Cave in the Grand Canyon, where they found Egyptian mummies and all sorts of stuff. They've walled that up, and they won't let anybody in there. And the Smithsonian has all of the artifacts. Won't let anybody see them.
Oh, yeah, and if you've heard Scott talk about the Smithsonian, he gets annoyed, and he did one of the episodes on America Unearthed where he had a very tall gentleman, I forget his name. They were explaining a hike that they did to go down into the canyon, and it was very dangerous. So Scott rents a helicopter, and they're flying around, the three of them, and then Scott asked the helicopter driver to go down to where this guy's cave was, and the helicopter pilot, who was a woman, says, no, we can't go there. FAA regulations, we cannot fly down there. No, you're not allowed there. Well, what is down there that you're not allowed there?
Right, and what? So the Egyptians were here? Great, but and that, and the other thing that is truly being suppressed is all of the giants that were in this country. This country was populated by giants before the Native Americans came in here, and the bones are all over the place. The proof is there. The Smithsonian has gathered most of them up, but there are tens of thousands of skeletons of literal giants, and I'm talking anywhere from 8 to 12 to 20 feet high, and it's being held back from us. They won't acknowledge.
Well, I mean, I know Scott personally, and I know some of the people around him, and they're really pushing hard to put out as much as they can, and they're doing a good job considering what they have to do to deal with networks. But people are demanding, and people, are demanding the info, and he's engaged his audience by asking, if you have something unusual, call me, let me know. And so he's got a real, interactive process going on. And I know a lot of what Scott believes, and I'm excited that he's in that position, and at least that's a breakthrough. But I do believe that there is, as much as there are so many of us that want to break free and let go of all the dogma and religion and that sort of thing and really get down to the business of why we're here, but there is, by those in power, there still is a strong need to control people. And that's the struggle we find ourselves in. Thank God we have the Internet.
Oh, yeah. Somebody had suggested that I asked you about the Newport Tower, because that has fascinated me, too.
Yeah, I've gone up to the Newport Tower many, many times. I lived up there for a summer, and I used to unconsciously walk by it every day. It's kind of funny. And have done a lot of research. I've been up there with my buddy Tim Walsh-Murphy, who's an author on these things, and so on and so forth. Talk to everybody. The Newport Tower, to me, is Templar. It is certainly Scandinavian, and it is certainly medieval. And as a matter of fact, there was a paper published this summer by Gunnar Thompson that really begins to support. And recently, and I mean I'm talking in the last 2 weeks, there are a couple of guys I know who believe they found new runic inscriptions on the tower. That hasn't been substantiated. That hasn't, there's photographs. If you Google it, you'll find some of that information. Renee Barnett, a friend of mine, just did a radio show on it last night. So there's possibly new things that are being found there. To me, it's Templar, it's Cistercian. There is, if you look at the windows and the alignments, you have a winter solstice light phenomenon that goes across to this egg-shaped keystone, if you will. Not quite a keystone. And that is representative of certain beliefs of the Cistercians. A very hard structure to build. It wasn't just arbitrarily built. There are connections with different alignments. There's a Professor Penhallow who figured out a lot of the astronomical alignments in the tower, and Scott did an episode on it. Absolutely fascinating, and there is a correlation to Venus there. And when you look at a lot of this stuff, you begin to see the code.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I know that there are the alignments to the solstices and the equinoxes, and I know that a lot of the chambers that are in the northeast here are situated that way as well. But there's more to it, and I know my husband Patrick did a whole bunch on the Great Pyramid at Giza and how it was so much. Absolutely not built by Cheops, for sure, and because there was graffiti way up in the rafters someplace doesn't mean that he did the pyramid. He did do the 3 smaller ones for himself, his wife, and his children, but he did not build the big one. And again, it's a tool, and it's a matter of what is it a tool for. And
some people believe the Great Pyramid in Giza is a massive power generator.
Yeah, exactly. It could be
receiving and transmitting, and it's part of the grid system. Very integral part of the grid system. That what is it fueling here on Earth? Is it fueling? Sometimes I wonder about that, Barbara. With all the grid work I've studied and all the teachers, and for a decade traveling to these locations in the United States, in Europe, in the UK, in Egypt, just driven to do this. And I always ask myself, does consciousness flow through these grids? Is there a control game going on? Whoever controls the grids controls consciousness? I don't know, but it's not a simple thing. Or do these do these points support a hologram of some sort? I don't know.
I don't think you can control the grid, to be honest with you. The grid is there. I think it's a matter of learning how to use it, to be perfectly honest with you. Because there are...
Right. That's what I mean. Years ago I worked in utility law, and you have infrastructure, and then you have the electricity that flows through the infrastructure. So what I'm saying, yes, of course the infrastructure has to be there, but then there's a certain energy that seems to transmit and flow.
Yeah. They say that people talk about UFOs, coming to the Earth for its minerals and things like that. That's such garbage. I would be more inclined to think that they're going for the plasma in our sun for fuel. That would make greater sense to me than
that's interesting.
Yeah, it just, now that's liquid, that's fuel, that's something that can be absorbed and utilized. That makes sense to me. But sending people out to dig gold or uranium or anything like that, so that it's rough, and then refining it for fuel for their ships, I don't think so. I don't think those ships travel on the kind of fuel, any kind of fuel we have cognizance of. But I want to get back to Reneslechateau, because
and something we could actually go in a direction of the grids and in the geometry of what's on the Earth there, and how that does affect the human being. So if I could just kind of jump into that, one of the things that Henry Lincoln did was, after Holy Blood, Holy Grail, he wrote a book called The Holy Place, and he figured out. And it's a brilliant presentation. He did it in this little church for my group a week ago, and I'll tell you, I've seen it before, and I was just mesmerized once again, because how he figured this out, truly I'll never know, but he did, and he quantified it. So for your listeners to understand this is incredible. There are grid systems on the Earth. There are ley lines that emit incredible energy. And then there's Reneslechateau, where 5- and 6-pointed stars can be traced out on the land, on the landscape, with a precision that is uncanny. And although you find it in southern Norway, and although you find it on Bornholm, and we know that by the time it got to Bornholm, it was definitely Templar. They were using this arcane technology, and the churches are there in Denmark. And we know that this technology was spread across the land in southern Norway. So it can be seen in other places, and it is, quite frankly, the same technology. But what makes it different in the Reneslechateau area is that the points on the land that make the geometry work are natural topographical features like peaks and mountains. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. And when you go there, Bugarash Mountain, which is part of it, Jules Verne, another writer, was deeply fascinated by Bugarash Mountain. And some of his stories connect to the inner earth mysteries, or the legends that are said that there's subterranean worlds down there, vast places of complexity and depth and incredible fascination, certainly for Jules Verne. So you have these incredible locations on the ground there, and they connect mathematically to create an incredible 5-pointed star and 6-pointed star. And it's such an intricate landscape geometry. In its original form, it had to have, I'll say, divine intervention, because I don't know what else to say about it, how it was created on the Earth there. And that's the ancient part of Rennes that is incredibly special.
Yeah, it seems to me that while there are definitely secrets there, it feels to me like a place of initiation. It feels to me as though it's a place where someone would be able to wake up parts of themselves. I've never been. It's somewhere. It's on my bucket list, but it feels to me as that's where are there pilgrimages there? Are there groups of people?
Absolutely. I mean, mine was called Initiation.
Okay.
The Secrets of Southwest France. The thing about my last tour there, which was just last week, was initiation through the land. And what I do with people, I will get, I'll sit down with Henry and we'll look at history and we'll do a varied amount of things, but we walk the earth, and I tend to do simple ceremony at landscape points, at nodal points, at points that vibrate energy. And I'll do some drumming. I'll do shamanic drumming. Burn sage. We'll go into caves. We'll be in rivers. We'll utilize. We'll be in peaks on the mountains. It depends. And we do ceremony in these locations and get very mindful and go within and allow those earth energies to rise up, and the heavenly earth on the heavenly imprint on the earth there to descend. So it's the Hermetic principle that's alive and well there, because in reality there is no separation.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what you can access there, and that to me personally, the rest of it's incredible, but it's that blows my mind.
Well, and quite possibly the whole mystery and the Holy Blood, Holy Grail stuff could easily have been just the reason for people to go there, and maybe the secret is that once there was another direction to go.
Well, I've often wondered that. Because if as much as I have a devotion to Mary Magdalene in spirit, and to Yeshua, and to reconstructing their teachings and on and so on, and the Templars, and it's been an incredible journey to understand. But what happens to me personally, every time I go there, and this was just my 14th trip, and it was by far the best ever. I mean, they've all been amazing, but really going deep into the earth, into this initiation, deep into the womb in the Cathar caves, and drumming in darkness, and having somebody playing a pan flute, and oh my God, just being still and being present. What I've learned is that when I go there, it's alchemy on the land. And if I walk it, and if I do the Grail Quest, if I do the pilgrimage, and I'm true to myself, I find that every time I would go, something would emerge in me. The dross would get burned off. Alchemically we talk about burning off the dross, and that would get burned off. And I would have to face my shadow. One time I had to go into the underworld and face that level of fear and what the illusion of it all. And every trip was different. And now, and every time I would come home, I would have to process that experience. But what I realized is that once I got through that, my perception accelerated.
Yeah, I just, I'm sure that there is further mystery. I'm sure that he did find something. I would hate to think it's been destroyed, because that means that we have to rediscover it someplace else, and I'm sure it is someplace else. But it to me feels as though all of that was to draw people to that place so that they could experience something of a spiritual epiphany within themselves. And of course, everybody is at a different place at a different time, so that it's different for everyone. But it just seems that I keep hearing, but there's more to be discovered, and I don't know if it's in the ground or in the individual.
I think it's both.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's both. I know that out of all the places that I've traveled to, and I feel this when I'm in the Southwest of America. I was born in New Mexico. Ironically, I was born in Roswell. And I certainly was given the message when my journey began, Mary Magdalene in spirit. She came and she said, pay attention to what's underground. And that has many meanings. But I find that when I go to France and I walk the earth there, I'm always being drawn not up, but in, literally in to the earth. And it becomes a deeper and richer experience every time I'm there, so much so that this time we actually went inside the earth as a group and met a tour guide who have these steel rowboats, and they pull them inside the earth on a river that's inside the earth. And the men in the boats, because I only saw men doing this, they have like this cable system, and they literally pull the boat. And every now and then they let it get really quiet. And it is an extraordinary experience to be on a river inside the earth.
Oh, I can't imagine. That must be phenomenal.
It is phenomenal. And so I'm always being pulled into the earth there. And I do believe that that's part of the deeper mystery. Very much so.
You've mentioned in at least one of your books, I think, a healing pond, a healing waters. There are healing waters there someplace. I know when I pulled
absolutely
pictures,
in Reneslechateau. Yeah, that's one place. Yeah.
I pulled a lot of pictures that I put in the scroll on
I saw them. They're great.
Okay. All I kept saying was, gee, I hope this is, not her visit to some place in Florida or something.
No. We stayed in Reneslechateau this year at my friend's place called Maison Christina, a wonderful place. And the magic there is that the thermal waters, in Europe we have some of this in the United States too. Specifically Arkansas comes to mind. But there they have a lot of places where they have hot springs. And they are very therapeutic at the very least. I mean, again, the Romans were taking the baths in Reneslechateau, which they called aqua caldae, 2,000 years ago. And what happens, it's so miraculous. What happens is that there's a salted river. Now, you're not on the ocean there, but there had to be ocean there at some point. So you have this salted river that trickles down the countryside, and it meets up with the Blanc, or the White River, and it mixes. And as it does, the river flows right through Reneslechateau, and you have public baths that look like a swimming pool, but then you have the natural baths that just keep flowing through the town. And there's one that has a natural pool, and the water that pours on you is warm. It's thermal. It's healing. And people have been going there. It was packed when I was there on the weekend because people they take the waters. And these are healing, miraculous waters.
Yeah, I've read a lot about them, and there are a lot of documents that do attest to healing taking place, and I think the one thing that everybody has to remember, at least this is my opinion, that if you go through this kind of a healing in the body, that the spirit has to be healed as well, and you have to make a change to your life, or it doesn't stay.
Well, I think that's true. I absolutely think that, and I think it's where you're at vibrationally. And I'll give you a case in point. There was a mother and daughter who came on my tour, people I've known, and they came. And the daughter was, very much loves the earth and the land and the waters, and I knew she would just adore being there. It was just so her. And I got the intuitive message at one point when we were doing a little circle that her life would change direction. And she took in so much earth energy and was so in her element that she's already told her mother that her course, she's making a course correction in her life. And she's very happy about it. And that's great. And the mom experienced it on a whole different level, being in a whole different place in life, in a whole different vibration. And for her, it was a different experience, and yet she felt changed by the experience, although she cannot articulate that yet, what that means for her, what it looks like. And I try to tell people when you go home, don't just jump back into the story of your everyday life. Unless it's so zen for you that everything is just exactly what you want it to be. In other words, when you go through that initiation and you do feel different, allow the difference to shake up your physical world.
Right.
Because, like you said, if you're vibrationally rearranging there, if you're healing, your physical world has to move. It's just part of the equation.
Oh, yeah. I think that's one of the things that so many people don't understand is that when you're given a gift like that it's not just the physicality that is changed, but you have the choice of changing the spiritual side. And if you choose to, then the healing just is much more profound and stays with you forever because you've changed your pathway. Not dramatically. It can be a very subtle change, but just your perception of your reality is enough to understand that you're part of a whole, that we are all one, that the law of one applies to all of us, and there's just so much more in life than those who are just locked into the physical reality understand. So that it's a wonderful awakening. And
I totally agree, and I know I've had trips where I've come back and it's been hard to adjust back in. I've wanted to just turn around and get on a plane and go back and just stay. And, my guides, in my meditation, it would know this is where you belong and this is where your work is. And okay, fine. But you have to allow that change. If we're really shifting, then we have to shift. We can't just shift in our minds and think that our physical reality doesn't shift along with it. It may be the last to shift because it's the denser vibrational energy and it takes a little bit more to move it. But the thing that blows my mind, and the thing I see more and more every time I go do a pilgrimage at Rennes and come home, is that we have to understand that we have choices. And our choices aren't this limiting palette of beliefs that we've been sold, and that's the only way we can live our life. If we're making the shift, and if we believe in presence and enlightenment and certainly compassion and those virtues, unconditional love, but if we believe in these things, we have to allow them to move us in our life. Because we are at such a point where change has to be physical now. It has to be. It can't just be that we're thinking about something in our heads anymore. The stakes are too high.
Well, exactly, and we have to, I think one of the things that I tell people so much is that having a philosophy in your head and understanding a philosophy is wonderful. But if you're not incorporating it into your life and living it and walking it, then it's wasted space. You have to get out there and you have to live the philosophy. You have to practice what you're preaching. You cannot just have a thought, yes, I understand all of this, but I'm too busy with my everyday life to actually incorporate it into my everyday life. So
exactly, and that's not shifting. Shifting is really bringing these beliefs. It's what I call, we talk about the quest for the Holy Grail. It's what I call embodying the Grail, becoming the Grail.
Well,
it's not just a thought or a story that we open the book on every now and then. When our vibration changes and we allow it to change because life, it has come at a point in life where that's the only way forward, then we have to allow ourselves to live from that vibration. And to me, that's what the Jesus and Mary Magdalene story is all about. You've read my channeled books with her. It's about them living in their mastery. And what comes, comes. It's them living through the heart. And what comes, comes. It's them open to the adventure of life. And what comes, comes. Not having everything so metered out that there's no chance for magic or synchronicity or the experience of life. Oh,
absolutely. And I think with the work that I do with people, the thing that is the hardest for me to get through to them is that they are a part of God. They are God. And if they're looking for something from God, they have to look inside. They can't look
absolutely
inside. So in many ways, the Grail is already there inside. It's finding it.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And I think when you go to a landscape temple, because Henry Lincoln calls this the holy place. So the way I see it is that you're working with an etheric temple. You're working with a temple on the ground that some force in its infinite intelligence created. And people throughout time have recognized its harmonic proportions. If we take the idea of sacred geometry, or, heaven on earth, and if we strip away some of those terms, and we don't need to, but if we do, and we look at that place, it is one of harmonic proportion. It's coherent. And when the human body, the human field, walks in a landscape that is coherent, it will sooner or later become coherent. But alchemically, what does it need to do? It needs to burn off the dross. It needs to look at the shadow. It needs to get rid of the crap that no longer serves us, the belief systems that don't make any sense. And that's why when I was talking about walking into the Church of Mary Magdalene, and you see the demon with the holy water stoup and the salamanders and the angels, we're talking fire, water, earth, and air. We're talking about the alchemy. And alchemy was all about, the idea of turning base metals into gold, but it's the human spirit that's being refined. And that's the opportunity there that I have found, that in all the incredible places I've been, and there have been amazing and wonderful places, but that is the place where I found that the alchemy is present, it is available to us every step we take there.
Well, yeah, and when they talk the Philosopher's Stone and turning base metal into gold, it really was more or less a symbolic thing of turning ignorance into wisdom and understanding and grace. And it's kind of get to that place where you're not talking material stuff, you're talking spiritual stuff, you're talking your spirit ascending into another level of understanding and perception of this and other dimensions. That's the gold, as far as I'm concerned. Of course, I wouldn't deny gold now and then, but
right, and there are certain scientific processes. I mean, I've seen them in film. I was just watching a program on Nova on Isaac Newton and his hidden life. He was a heretic. He did not believe that he didn't believe the Jesus story. And, I think he believed in Jesus. He didn't believe in the religion that was formed around him. And he had to keep that secret. And he also had to keep his love of alchemy secret. So all these great advances that Isaac Newton made in the world of science and equation and all that business, his real passion was alchemy. And I have seen people work with the metals. So they can do that. But the higher ideal is to transform ourselves into enlightened beings. And I think that's why you find so many of the layers of history and mystery in Rennes, because it's believed that when the Celtic people were there, which was before the Romans, if I have my history right, maybe during the time of them, there might have been an overlap. It is believed in all those standing stones that they erected in the Reneslechateau area that they were creating a cromlech. They were protecting the womb, again, if you will. And that seems to go around Rennes-les-Bains, where the waters are. And even Abbé Boudet, who was Father Saunier's friend, he wrote this book in his time called The True Celtic Language, the cromlech of Rennes-les-Bains. And people laughed him out of the park, and he was a really smart guy, but he was leaving a coded story behind for us as well. And he draws upon that layer of history. So I say that because if it was always recognized as a holy place, as one of those places where you could seek enlightenment, where you could be alchemically transformed, a place of initiation, a holy temple, all these incredible inferences, of course people throughout time would always be drawn there, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely, just like magic. And I would almost be willing to guess that one of the first inclinations of most people is to take their shoes off and walk the earth. And in doing that, they're connecting with the heartbeat of the Earth Mother, and they're reconnecting with an energetic that helps them to come into a greater synchronistic, harmonistic, energetic within themselves and within the Earth. Because and there are lots of books out there now on earthing. It's the thing now.
Oh yeah.
But it what it does is it's sort of like there is an inclination to try to reconnect and to feel the energy coming up out of the earth, because that has to be a spot on the earth where it just flows so easily and so readily that you can soak it up and you just don't want to move.
Well, I'll tell you another tidbit, all these wonderful little tidbits that come out, but a friend of mine was making a film, and some of it had to do with the mystery of Reneslechateau, and this was years back, and there was the mayor, the little local mayors of these towns, especially one like Reneslechateau, the Mairie, they call them, they have a lot of power. Sounds silly, but they do. And so he was quite a character, this guy. And they went to him to talk to him about getting permission, I think, to look under the ground in the Church of Mary Magdalene there, and they were denied. But the mayor turned to them, and he was a tough man, and he turned to them and he said, the real secret of Reneslechateau are the telluric currents, the telluric energy. And we know that energy is just below the ground.
Well, a lot of times, too, those large stones that are standing stones are linked directly into ley lines, so that they are basically radiating energy as well. I would almost bet that the level of illness in Reneslechateau is probably lower than almost any other place on the earth.
I don't know. I've often wondered that, and I actually am going to do some scientific work for the first time because I have some theories about what's in the earth there and how it can be utilized for regeneration. I mean, certainly the area has always had the reputation as a spa area, and certainly, like I said, Charlemagne took the waters, the Romans took the waters, and God knows before that it was probably the Celts and certainly the Druid culture. But I, through my own work with Ormus and other elements, I have theories about what really is going on there. And so this time we're going to test a few things scientifically and see what we can come up with. But all the elements are there. And so I think let's put it this way. It's one of those places that I think can help you extend longevity, but you have to do the work. Otherwise, it could kill you, if you will.
Oh, yeah.
It's just like, the secrets of snake venom. Snake venom will kill you, but master healers know how to work with snake venom to regenerate you.
Absolutely. I think that what is going on here is amazing, and I'm really hoping that that there can be more information that comes out that helps people to understand that among other things, to go to some place like Reneslechateau, oh, you're right in the middle of all of the magic, you really are. But it's something that you can tune into. It's something that you can experience within yourself, whether or not you are physically present there. You've written 4 books that I know of. I don't know if there are more or not, but
there are more in process right now. They're not done yet.
Do you want to share a little bit? I know both of them are parts of a series that is yet to be completed, but I found them both fascinating, and I would love for you to kind of share a little bit about what each of the different series is.
Sure, absolutely. I I started with the novels. I used to write plays, but I started with the novels. And the first one is The Tower and the Dream, Awakening to the Call. And it's a story of a character coming from everyday life, where so many of us have sleepwalked through at different points in our lives for various reasons, and in different times. And the character begins to get signs and synchronicities and dreams, and wakes up and finds herself being drawn back to the desert lands in New Mexico, in the great American Southwest. And it is a modern-day story and, in my opinion, a grail quest. It's fascinating. And at the beginning of each chapter is a channeled voice, is a voice of Mother Mary, is a voice of Joseph of Arimathea, is a voice of Joan of Arc, is a voice of Benjamin Franklin, Teresa of Avila. It really runs quite a gamut of characters. And the second book that I wrote in the novel, The Tower series, and I'm working on the third one right now. There will be 5. The second one is The Tower and the Land. The land, we're talking about Reneslechateau, right? France and the mysteries. Awakening to the Light. And in that book, Mary Magdalene's voice is channeled throughout the book. At the beginning of each chapter, there's a passage. Mm-hmm. And when a friend of mine read it, who isn't into channeled material, who is more skeptical of metaphysical paranormal on some level, she's open but skeptical. And when she read the books and she heard Mary's voice, she says, I have to tell you, there's something there. You really should collect those passages and put them in a book. And I said to myself, wow, if she feels that and she's skeptical, it's really resonating within her, I need to look at this. And before I knew it, I had the first volume of Mary Magdalene, Revelations from a First Century Avatar, where she went off and began to tell her story, and she began to answer questions. And I integrated a little bit of my story in there as well, my Gloria's story about where I've come from. And there is a second one out, which is the continuation. And right now I'm about halfway through writing the third and final book in that series, the channeled series with Mary.
Well, it's they're very different, but the two different series, but fascinating nonetheless. And it does lead you into new directions of questioning within yourself, which I would assume that's what you were intending, because certainly that's what you achieved anyhow.
Yeah, well, I just went with whatever, connecting to that frequency, which I have done along with Yeshua. I feel very clear with that as a channel. I let it evolve. I really wasn't sure what was going to come of it, and I have to say that some of it really challenged me, and I would have to go through a shift between the first volume of her channeled material and the second. She told me very clearly in meditation that I would have to go through another shift to even write it and to receive the information. And I thought, oh, my God, I thought I was clear enough and blah, 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 and, that whole dialogue. And then eventually I made the shift I needed to make energetically, and I received. And I am about halfway through the third one now, and I know why I haven't been able to finish it. You have to trust the process. I had to go to France this time, and I had to go so deep into the earth to understand what she's now going to tell me. And this is just dropping in real time, Barbara, what she's going to tell me about the earth there. The deeper mystery of that earth there. And I had to feel it and walk it and experience it and, sweat and huff and puff and do everything you do to get to some of these locations so that I could really experience it, so that when that material is channeled through me, I'll get it.
It would seem to me that especially being pulled into an underground river was very much like going into the womb.
Oh,
So
it went so deep into the womb. There were times where I was almost scared.
yeah,
It was so beautiful, it was so magical, and yet it was like, wow, this is beyond anything I've ever experienced. And quite frankly, I loved it. We had a very chatty and cheerful guide through the river, and I'm sure most people really like that, and I get that. But for me, I would have been happy to go through the river quietly and really hear the sounds of the earth. We were able to do it a few times, and that was at least wonderful for me personally, because I felt like I was so deep inside creation that, oh my God, there just weren't even words for the feelings. So I think Mary brings me through experiences, and then the third one will just get written. I know it's going to be done within a few months. It will be complete. And I'm looking forward to that now because I get it. This impeccable presence, this energy, this frequency that I identify as Mary Magdalene is incredibly intelligent. And sometimes I don't trust, like I just need to get out of the way and allow the process to happen, and it always does. There's something I can say for your listeners and for you that I think it's a good thing, and this is why I'm going to say it. When this third Magdalene channeled book is done, I'm told I'm going to do 3 for Yeshua, for Jesus. Oh, cool. And the reason why is that in a meditation, he came to me and said, it's time for the immortality teachings to be known. And I thought, okay. And he says, you're going to write these. And I thought, oh boy. I'm like, really? Do you think, here I am having this conversation. Really? Do you really think we should, this needs to be put out there? And in my meditation, Jesus said, it's time we level the playing field.
Interesting that he'd use that kind of phrase.
It's interesting, and I will tell you why it's really interesting to me, is because I received in the mail, don't know how, I received a DVD on transhumanism. And if your listening audience doesn't know about that term, it's really about artificial intelligence being manipulated, just like we have GMO food.
Yeah.
We have that going on in different species. It feels very Atlantean to me, and that's why we're at such a critical time. And I watched this DVD in shock because, of course, I've seen the Jason Bourne, the Bourne Identity movies, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But this DVD was pure fact, and it showed all the programs out there where artificial intelligence is being manipulated between species and the hybrids of things that are out there. And so I understood then when Jesus said, we're going to level the playing field. In other words, we're going to show people how to turn on their innate biology, their genetic code, their superhuman ability, far different than what they're living, because there are governments and there are corporations who are already doing this. And people, we need to level things out here because we can do this naturally.
Yeah, I have always believed that genetically we had the ability to do everything, and that it was merely a matter of, if you're into computers, sometimes you have widgets that have to be turned on in order for something to function. And
exactly.
And I feel that we have the genes inside of us that haven't been triggered yet, but they're there. It's just a matter of turning them on and allowing them to flow through you, and then using them wisely and using them carefully. And not. I think the danger is that not everyone will use them wisely. So it's a matter of you have to find the pathway to where they are, and that's a spiritual pathway. And if you can get down that pathway, you can turn on those aspects of yourself genetically so that you are capable of doing everything that Jesus did and far, far more. Everything that the Vimanas talk about, the Veda talks about, everything that has seemed impossible becomes possible because we have the capacity to do it, and that we all have it. It's not like there are special people here. Everybody has the capacity to do it. It's a matter of, do you want to do the work to get to the place to turn it on? And
exactly. Because if you try to take the shortcuts, and God knows throughout time people have tried to take the shortcuts. And I've seen this in Reneslechateau too, that people try to take the shortcuts and they try to find the treasure. And they don't do their work, because the Grail quest isn't always, it's an outer quest, but it's an inner quest, and they go hand in hand. And if you try to take the shortcuts, you'll be fried. Remember in both Indiana Jones, the first one, with the Ark of the Covenant, and then the third one about the Holy Grail. In the first one, I don't know if you remember when they open the Ark of the Covenant. It's been a long time, but people look. You're not supposed to look into it, whatever it was. But the other characters got destroyed. And in the third one with Sean Connery, and they have to look at the Grail cups. And the real Grail cup was a simple cup, but the characters, I think it was the Germans that were, always, fighting with Indy there. They picked the most ornate, the one with jewels and gold and all that, and their faces melt. Certainly a Hollywood movie effect, but in truth, if you try for your shortcuts on any of these levels, your circuitry just can't handle it, and you will implode.
Yeah, I do think it's an external journey. It's a physical journey, but it's an internal treasure. And as soon as people realize that, then they've got something going. I think that the treasure to somebody like Mary Magdalene would not have been gold and silver and jewels. It would have been awakening.
It would have been mastery.
Yeah,
when human beings, when people realize that we have the ability to co-create, we'll say with the divine, with that pure harmony that is omnipresent. When people begin to remember what they did know in the ancient world, but it was kept in the temples. It was kept separate from the people, but it was always kept alive. It was always preserved. There was always that vibration on the earth, even though it was separate from the people. It was in the temples, and it was in initiations and texts and understanding, and people, if they were lucky enough, they were able to have that experience in life. But, to me, especially now with the cosmology that's in play in a post-2012 world, we do have the ability to co-create on that level, and we just have to remember it. And when we are too synced into physical reality, we begin to think too much through the lens of the ego and think that we need all this medication and we need all these clothes and we need to have all of those things that really do take us away from our own power. If we can have them and still be empowered, I'm not against material things, but if we can have them and they don't really mean all that much to us and they don't control us and we can be in our power, then great, so be it. But most people get pulled out of their power back into the ego, and that's the great quandary that we have going on right now.
Oh, yeah, and, I have people that will say to me, well, you say that I have the power and yet I don't have, if I have the power, where is it? And it's like, just tell me where it is. And it's like, it's inside of you. And, well, I don't see it. I can't make it work. And then I just say, then you're not ready. And, they say it's a cop-out. And it's not. It's the truth. If you're really looking for it, if you're really searching for it, then you'll find it. It's there. but it has to be
You
genuine.
know, it's in our biology, too. It's in our physiology. I mean, we do know we have a pineal gland. It's part of the endocrine system in the body. We do know that the pituitary gland is a master gland in the body, and we know how important these glands are in the endocrine system, in the human body functioning on a physical level. And when that pineal gland is alive and open, it secretes fluids, and these fluids, these substances that the body knows to release, are regenerative, restorative, and also help us remember our full database of lifetimes and memories. I mean, it is said of Jesus that he was born basically knowing his ancestral library. He was born so conscious. I mean, I still think he had things to figure out, but he came through a very conscious birth that was done ritualistically through a community that was their goal. When someone is born like that, the veil of forgetting is very little in their life, and they remember they don't have to remember everything because it's already born intact, and that doesn't happen very often. But what I'm saying is, I think that's what we are going back to. We are not there yet. We are remembering. We are putting the pieces together, and it is all inside of us. And the pineal gland has a lot to do with our regeneration and renewal in the body.
Well, look at the Dalai Lama. I mean, they go searching for the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama that passed, and they find the Dalai Lama by finding a child that recognizes his own possessions.
Yes.
So, I mean,
so
I'm
the
not
memories are intact.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a young child, 4 or 5 years old, and I think they're older than that when they're actually taken to the temple with the parents, certainly. But I know with the last one, they walked him into the chambers, and he pointed on a table. He said, "Oh, that's where I put my teeth," and that's where his false teeth were. So it is amazing. It does happen. It isn't, we're not talking something that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen that often, and.
These memories have always, as I was saying before, how there have always been people pursuing initiation and enlightenment on the face of the earth, and we had the separation of the people, and we had the temples, and that's where they would perpetrate this lineage of light, I call it, this remembering, this knowing, this ancestral memory base. So if you go back into the Jesus story and you look at, and a lot of people don't talk about this, but you look at Mother Mary was the gifted child of her generation. She was the temple child, and their tradition was to return the child to the temple at a certain age, and then they began their learning. They began their understanding. They began to learn about the rituals of the temple and whatever that particular temple was teaching. And so she was recognized as such, and she went through her temple training. And this is Mother Mary. And it was most, and I'll say this, and this will be interesting for your listening audience, but it makes sense if you take out the charge of emotion and religion in it. There was a tradition at the time of Mother Mary where the temple virgins, of which she would have been, and she would have been finishing her training, would have been impregnated very consciously by the temple priest, by whoever that chosen person was, so that they would seed a lineage, they would seed a bloodline, they would seed memories, they would seed consciousness. And so that before she left, she would be impregnated, because that was the way they preserved the bloodline, the memory, consciousness. And so the story that we're given, that I'm not trying to take anything away from anyone, but if you look at other interpretations, the idea that an angel came and just impregnated, the way that worked, okay, possibly. but more likely she was a protected temple child. She was the gifted child, so she would be impregnated, and Joseph would have known, he would have understood this practice, and he would have chosen to marry her, knowing full well that the child growing in her belly would become the temple child of that generation. And when you begin to look at this stuff, you begin to say, okay, if I can get past the idea of my upbringing and my religion and my beliefs and all that stuff and look at it, it really does make a lot of sense that this is what they would do. It made sense.
Well,
and
I know she was royalty as well.
Yes.
So that the lineage, you know, he was of the House of David, right? House of David, I believe.
Yes.
So that he had a right to the throne.
Yes.
King of the Jews, yeah, he had a right to that title. So I know that Pilate did not want Pilate wanted to let him go. Pilate's wife was one of Jesus's disciples, followers for sure. So you know, there was a great deal. There's a great deal that's just not told, and I don't know why. I guess because it just doesn't go along with the story the church is telling. But if you read more deeply, if you look more deeply, you can find that there is so much that has been not shared. And I was trying to
Well, if you study the history of the Roman Catholic Church, of which I grew up in, you have to admit to yourself that it is a very dark history. It is steeped in brutal suppression, torture, and control. And if you spent time in Europe and if you spent time in France going through the Cathar lands, which I just did recently, it is difficult to accept, even this day, what was done to them. And the beautiful land that they lived in and what they were doing. They were very enlightened. They were Gnostic. They had some Pythagorean, some Egyptian knowledge. They were pretty advanced, but they weren't bothering anyone. And the level of extermination was I mean, we think Hitler, you know, the number to the Jews in Europe, and he did. But what was done by the Holy Roman Catholic Church in the name of God to the Cathars, and then later other people's, anybody that opposed their doctrine, which was false, was basically killed. You know, many forms of torture. And when we look at all that, it's just difficult. And when you have that memory in your cells, it's hard to get past that. That's why when people do past life work and those lifetimes come up for them, they have to face fears and trauma that is deep in their cells. And I've experienced this so much in my work. When they move through it, oh my God, they're like a new person. But it's amazing, you know, that those memories are held too. And the memories of suppression must go.
Well, and when
they
you
must
look at
move beyond our experience.
When you look at what became the Bible, I mean, the Old Testament, first of all, was oral teaching. It was Hebrew. It was Aramaic. It was Greek. And then Constantine had it written in Latin. And then after that, of course, it was translated into Old English, which nobody could read. And so now we have a book here that's gone through 4 different translations. So you don't even know what the original was. You know, you don't have any idea as to what was originally written there. And then you realize that Constantine put it together with Eusebius and his mother. I mean, it was kind of like guys sitting around a table saying, well, what about this one? No, that doesn't flow. Let's put this one in instead. It wasn't exactly what I would call an inspired conglomeration of material. It was more or less
not at all.
You know, what agrees with my philosophy and what doesn't. And so much was left out. It was just horrific. So, and I'm not trashing the Bible. I know it's the bestseller of all time, and I do think that there is great wisdom and great information in it, but it's not exactly the teaching that we're told it is.
No, it really isn't. And when you have a document that's been around that long, there is natural corruption in translation. It just happens. I mean, it happens. It's just the process of human beings, editing or rewriting a text and so on and so forth. And there are some great books out there where, scholars have taken the time to go back and piece together every incident in history and person and translator. And you can really get a good understanding of how the doctrine of Jesus evolved into what it is today by going back and, reverse engineering the story. But you will find that, Constantine, the Council of Nicaea, before and after, they had great debates over, was Jesus the Son of God, or was he fully human, or was he fully divine? I mean, they didn't, most people didn't even think that. And for you and for your listeners to understand, I have great reverence for the teachings of Yeshua as I'm, finding them and what comes to me through channeling and my whole life experience. So I'm not denigrating or disrespecting it. I'm saying let's get to the truth, because the truth of this, the truth of who they were in their teachings is far more interesting and beautiful and enlightening. Yeah. And I think if Jesus was here today, he'd be the first one to say, what have you done in my name?
Yes. I think he'd be horrified. I just noticed.
He'd be horrified.
We have chatted through 2 hours. This has been so much fun. I have posted the link to Grave Distractions where your books can be gotten.
Okay.
I believe they can also be gotten on Amazon.
Correct.
Because that's where I got them.
Yep.
They're really good reads. They're not the kind of thing you struggle through at all. You have a wonderful conversational way of writing, so that they're easy reads, and they're thought provoking. And I think that anybody who chooses to pick them up is going to be waiting for the next books that are coming to market. And I so thank you for coming and being a part of the show and talking with me for 2 hours.
I loved it. I really did. It was so fun.
It definitely was fun. We'll have to do this again.
We will.
And I want to. This is Gloria. I don't want to pronounce your name wrong.
Amendola.
Amendola, and her books can be found in many places. Please do look for them because they are fascinating. And hopefully we have triggered curiosity, and we have triggered kind of like, maybe I should look more into some of this. And certainly if you guys haven't read Holy Blood, Holy Grail, you should buy that one too, because it's an amazing book and it will take you on an adventure you will never forget. Gloria, thank you again. I so enjoyed having you on the show. We're going to have to do lunch sometime.
Sounds great, Barbara. Just drop me a line.
I'll do that. Thanks again, and good night. Everybody, thanks for being here. This has been a lovely evening. It's always fun to talk to somebody who has the same direction and aim and philosophy on many levels, and she certainly was a lot of fun to talk to. Please go find her books. Go check her stuff out. It's really it's fascinating material, and I promise you won't be disappointed. You will be enlightened, and you will probably be set upon a trail of having to figure stuff out. And I guess the most important is always question. Thanks a lot, and good night, everybody.